The woman they laughed at. The night sparkled like a dream from the outside. The Blake estate, perched on the highest hill in the city, glowed like a golden castle under the moonlight. Hundreds of tiny lights traced the edges of marble balconies. Chandeliers shimmered from the ceilings, and the air was filled with the scent of rare flowers flown in from Italy just for tonight. Tonight was the event of the season, Richard Blake's grand anniversary gala, a celebration of power, success, and 5 years of marriage. It was invitation only. Politicians, CEOs, media moguls, and old money elites dressed in their finest lined up to attend. It was not just a party. It was a statement. But the woman at the foot of the hill didn't fit in. She stepped out of a modest black car, not a limo. She wore a red dress, elegant but simple, with no designer logos screaming from the seams. Her shoes were clean but not couture. Her auburn hair was pulled into a soft, modest bun. She didn't have a bodyguard. No assistant. No camera flashes followed her. She walked up the long, candlelit path alone. Her name was Sophia. And tonight, she would be judged, whispered about, humiliated, by people who had no idea who she really was. Inside the ballroom, laughter clinked against crystal glasses and violins floated through the air. Women with diamonds the size of olives waved manicured hands and gossiped. Men in tailored tuxedos adjusted their Rolexes and spoke in low voices about takeovers and hedge funds. Waiters moved like shadows with trays of champagne and canapes. Vivian Langston, wife of property tycoon Charles Langston, was the queen of this circle. Her gown sparkled with hand-sewn gems. Her eyes were trained to spot weakness, and tonight she found her target. "Who let the staff wander in?" she whispered, eyes narrowing at Sophia. Sophia stepped gently into the ballroom, her presence quiet yet strangely magnetic. She didn't make a show of herself. She didn't walk like someone trying to impress. She simply walked, shoulders back, eyes kind, holding herself with grace. Vivian moved quickly, linking arms with her friend Elaine Preston, heiress to a media empire. "Come," Vivian said with a smirk. "Let's meet our uninvited guest." Sophia had just reached the refreshment table, lifting a flute of champagne when the two women approached. "Oh dear," Vivian said sweetly, tilting her head. "The catering entrance is around the back, darling. I think you may have lost your way." Elaine chuckled, playing along. "Though I must say, red is brave, considering the guest list tonight." Sophia gave them a soft smile. "I was invited." Vivian's lips curled. "By whom?" "The florist." A few nearby guests paused, pretending to look away while listening closely. Sophia said nothing for a moment. Her hand brushed lightly across the band on her finger. A quiet centering habit. "I'm here for the anniversary." Elaine raised a perfectly plucked brow. "Interesting. I've been on the planning committee for weeks, and I don't recall you." Vivian stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to still be heard. "You know, dear, some people wear simplicity like it's a badge of honor. But in rooms like this," she gestured grandly, "it's often confused with invisibility." The air thickened. A few guests began drifting closer. The orchestra's notes seemed more distant now as attention shifted. Sophia didn't flinch. "Sometimes what's loudest," she said calmly, "is what doesn't need to shout." Vivian smirked. "That sounds poetic. Do you write greeting cards for a living?" Another giggle. Another sip of champagne. Another jab disguised as humor. Sophia's voice didn't shake. "No, I work in corporate mergers." Vivian blinked. "So, a secretary. Executive restructuring." Elaine rolled her eyes. "Sounds exhausting. But don't worry, dear. I'm sure someone brought you along for a bit of fun. Maybe the driver." The cruelty was growing, more bold now. Guests had formed a loose circle, curiosity drawing them in like moths. Sophia stood calm, but inside, her heart ached. She had spent weeks preparing for this night. Not for the dress or the ballroom, but for the meaning. The celebration of a love that had changed her life. And now, Vivian lifted her glass with flair. To the evening's unexpected surprise, she announced, loud enough for the room. Laughter erupted. Glasses clinked. The music faded beneath the mocking. A waiter stumbled past, his eyes darting to Sofia with quiet sympathy. She gave a small nod in return, then turned, intent on walking away. But a sound, sharp and sudden, froze everyone. Crash! A glass shattered against the marble. The laughter died. A tall man stood at the grand entrance. Immaculate tuxedo, strong jaw, cold fury burning in his eyes. Richard Blake, the host, the billionaire, and Sophia's husband. Richard's eyes scanned the crowd, then landed on Sofia. Then he saw the circle, the laughter, the broken glass. The fury that followed was ice, not fire. He stepped forward slowly. Each footstep echoed like thunder. Guests moved out of his way without thinking. Vivian froze. Elaine's hand trembled, her champagne flute rattling. "Mr. Blake," Vivian began, forcing a smile. "We weren't expecting you just yet." "Leave it," Richard snapped, his voice like steel, stopping a waiter who reached for the broken glass. The room dropped into full silence. He turned to the circle of people surrounding his wife. Then to Sofia. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes filled with pain, her posture still proud. "Who?" he said in a voice that sliced the air. "Insulted my wife." The ballroom gasped. Vivian paled. Elaine dropped her glass. Sofia stood frozen, not with fear, but with disbelief. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't needed this. But Richard had arrived, and he wasn't done. The storm he unleashed. For a long moment, time didn't seem to move. The only sound in the grand ballroom was the faint crackling of the shattered glass under Richard Blake's polished shoes as he walked across the marble floor. His face remained unreadable, controlled, yet deadly calm. Guests turned pale. Some lowered their heads. Others looked to Vivian and Elaine, who were frozen mid-breath. The weight of Richard's presence crushed the air out of the room. He stopped directly in front of Sofia. The man who had built empires with his mind, who turned failing businesses into gold, now stood beside a woman whose strength didn't come from money, but from dignity. And tonight, the world had dared to mock her. He reached for her hand. "Sofia," he said quietly, but his voice was like a strike of lightning. "Are you okay?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm fine." But Richard heard what her voice didn't say. The pain, the embarrassment, the betrayal. He turned around slowly, scanning the faces of his elite guests. The people who had smiled at him for years, who had asked him for favors, investments, connections. Now they stood guilty, exposed. Then his eyes landed on Vivian and Elaine. "You," he said simply. Vivian tried to smile. "Richard, darling, this is all a misunderstanding." He raised his hand to silence her. "Don't speak." Elaine instinctively took a step back, bumping into a waiter who almost dropped a tray. The waiter mumbled an apology, but Richard's voice cut across the room. "This woman," he said, motioning to Sofia, "is my wife. The woman I built this empire with. The woman who stayed with me when I was sleeping on a futon, running this company out of a one-room office in Queens." He paused, letting the truth sink into the diamond-studded crowd. "She doesn't need to wear Prada to be powerful. She doesn't need your shallow approval. Her heart is bigger than this ballroom. And yet tonight, you—" He looked at the crowd now, not just Vivian. "You made a joke out of her." Someone coughed awkwardly. A woman near the stage put down her champagne glass slowly. "I invited you here," Richard continued, "not because you're rich, not because you're powerful, but because I thought, foolishly, that you respected love, that you understood what this night means." He turned to the DJ, who had been frozen behind his turntables. "Cut the music." The violin stopped mid-note. The silence that followed was eerie. Then Richard turned to his security team. standing at the far side of the ballroom in black suits. "Escort them out." Vivian blinked. "Wait, what?" "You heard me," he said, not looking at her. "Get out." Elaine gasped. "You're serious?" "I'm done entertaining cowards," Richard said coldly. "You mocked my wife on our anniversary. You don't get to stay another second in our home." Vivian tried to stand her ground. "Richard, I've known you for 15 years. And in 15 seconds, I'll forget you ever existed." Security moved in. The crowd parted as two guards approached Vivian and Elaine. The women protested, but no one stepped forward to help them. Not even their husbands. "Not tonight." Vivian's voice cracked. "Richard, please." He finally looked at her, and in his eyes there was nothing left but disappointment. "You judged her for her dress," he said softly. "But it's your soul that's cheap." The crowd let out a collective breath. No one dared to clap. No one dared to speak. Vivian and Elaine were let out like criminals at a crime scene. Their heels clicked loudly against the marble, no longer confident but desperate, unsteady. Their designer gowns, once admired, now looked ridiculous against the backdrop of their disgrace. As the doors shut behind them, Richard addressed the room one last time. "If you stayed silent while they mocked her, don't think I didn't notice." Eyes dropped. Shame washed over faces that had once been arrogant. "You can leave too," he said, "if you think kindness is beneath you. If you think being rich means being cruel." No one moved. Good, he thought. He turned back to Sophia, who was still holding the champagne flute, her hand trembling slightly. He took it gently from her, placed it on a nearby table, and kissed her forehead. "Let's dance," he whispered. "But the guests, they're not important." And just like that, he led her onto the floor. The music didn't resume. No orchestra, no lights. Just the sound of their footsteps as he guided her gently in slow circles. The guests stood around them in stunned silence, some with tears forming, others unsure how to react. But all of them knew something powerful had just happened, something they would never forget. Because tonight wasn't just an anniversary. It was a declaration. That love mattered more than labels. That dignity outshined diamonds. That kindness was the new wealth. And that true power stood quietly in a red dress beside the man who would burn the world for her. Back in the lounge hours later, long after the guests had been sent home, Sophia sat barefoot on the velvet sofa, a mug of tea in her hands. Her hair was loose now, her eyes tired but warm. "I didn't want you to do all that," she said softly. Richard sat beside her, brushing her hair back. "You didn't ask me to. But I saw you. I saw them. And I will never let anyone disrespect the woman who made me who I am." Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. "You didn't need to prove anything," she whispered. "I wasn't proving anything," Richard said. "I was reminding them. And you, that you are not invisible." She smiled, tears wetting her lashes, and somewhere deep in the mansion, as the moonlight spilled in through the windows and the chandeliers finally dimmed, love, true, resilient, undeniable, danced quietly in the dark. Later that night, long after the last car had pulled away and the echo of diamonds against marble faded into silence, the mansion was transformed. Gone were the extravagant guests and shallow conversations. What remained was something far more real. Two people, sitting side by side, alone but never lonely. Sophia and Richard sat in the heart of their grand home, no longer surrounded by applause or judgment, but by memory. She was barefoot now, her heels discarded on the floor beside the piano. Her red dress was slightly wrinkled from the evening storm, but she wore it now like armor, a reminder of everything she had endured, and everything she had overcome. Richard handed her a warm cup of chamomile tea, something he'd made himself. No servants, no chefs, just him. "I didn't want that night to be ruined," she said quietly, fingers wrapped around the mug. "I spent weeks planning every detail. I just wanted us to celebrate what we've built." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the fireplace and added another log, the flames crackling like whispers in the dark. Then he turned back to her. "Do you know the first time I realized I loved you?" he asked, voice low. Sophia looked up, surprised. "It wasn't on that first trip to New York. Not when we got stuck on the subway, or when you fixed that broken radiator in my old office with nothing but duct tape and a butter knife." She laughed softly, remembering. "No," he said, walking over and sitting beside her. "It was the night you brought food to a man sleeping behind my building. I saw you kneel beside him and hand him your own sandwich, without telling anyone. No cameras, no applause, just you." Sophia blinked, stunned. "You didn't know I was watching," Richard said. "And I remember thinking, this is the kind of person I want by my side for the rest of my life." A long silence followed. Not empty, just full of unsaid emotions, swelling between them like a quiet song. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped in soft blue velvet. "What's this?" she asked, curious. He placed it in her hands. "A new ring," he said, "not because the old one wasn't perfect, but because after what you went through tonight, I wanted something else to mark this journey, this chapter." She opened the velvet pouch slowly. Inside was a ring unlike any she had seen, crafted with a single brilliant diamond encircled by a twisting band of ruby and sapphire vines. It was bold, symbolic, a reflection of everything she had become. "Oh, Richard, it's custom," he said gently. "The stones are woven like branches because you're the root. And everything I've built grew because of you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm not strong like you think," she said quietly. He smiled and wiped a tear from her cheek. "You're stronger," he whispered, "because you didn't need money to stand tall. You stood tall with nothing but grace, even when they laughed, even when they tried to break you." She looked at the ring again, then at him. "You always know what to say." "That's because I spent years listening to what you don't say." The next morning, the headlines hit the internet like a tidal wave. Billionaire Richard Blake throws out elites for mocking his wife. Video goes viral. "She's my wife." The 3 words that silenced a ballroom. Blake's guests outrage, but public applauds his defense of simplicity and love. Someone had captured the moment Richard raised his voice, told the world who Sophia was, and demanded justice in his own home. Millions shared it online. Comment sections exploded. "This woman is what real elegance looks like." Richard Blake just redefined what it means to be a man. You can't buy dignity. She proved it. Forget designer gowns. That red dress is legendary now. By the afternoon, fashion magazines were praising Sophia's timeless minimalism, and business articles discussed her role in Richard's empire. She didn't seek attention. It had found her. Vivian and Elaine tried to do damage control, but the damage was done. Both women were removed from multiple charity boards. Public opinion turned cold. Even their social media followings dropped overnight. But Sophia didn't celebrate their downfall. She didn't even speak about it, because she had something far more valuable: peace. That evening, while the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, Richard brought Sophia to the rooftop garden he had built for her years ago. It was quiet up there, just wind, petals, and golden light. "I thought I lost myself in all of this," Sophia admitted, "trying to plan the perfect night, trying to fit in with people who'd never see me." Richard took her hand. "They never deserve you," he said, "but I do." She looked into his eyes. "Do you ever regret marrying someone like me?" He laughed, pulling her close. "I regret not doing it sooner." And under the setting sun, the two of them stood still, wrapped in a silence only true love understands. The gift she never asked for. It had been 3 weeks since the night the ballroom fell silent. 3 weeks since diamonds turned into daggers, and then into dust. 3 weeks since the world saw what real strength looked like, not in flashing wealth or cutting words, but in a simple woman standing tall with dignity, while others tried to bring her down. Sophia had tried to return to normal. She went back to work quietly, as if her name hadn't been in headlines. She answered emails, attended boardroom meetings, and drank the same coffee from the tiny cafe on 6th and Blake Avenue. But the world wasn't done talking about her. Some called her the red dress woman. Others called her the silent storm. Bloggers praised her humility. Executives who once overlooked her now extended invitations to speak. Even a few universities sent honorary recognition. But Sophia didn't want the spotlight. She wanted her life back, the quiet one. The one with early morning walks and crossword puzzles on the balcony. The one where no one whispered when she entered the room. But something had changed, and it was too late to pretend otherwise. One evening, as golden twilight poured into the penthouse, Richard entered the living room holding an envelope the color of moonlight. He wore no suit, no tie, just a soft sweater and that familiar look in his eyes, the one that always meant he'd been planning something behind her back. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "You're smiling like a man who's up to something." He sat beside her, slid the envelope onto her lap, and said, "You deserve a night that's truly yours." She opened it slowly. Inside, a single gold-embossed invitation. A private performance. The Metropolitan Opera House. Closed to the public. For one couple only. Her eyes lifted to meet his. "You remembered," she whispered. "You talked about it our first year together. How you always wanted to see La Bohème live, but never had the time. Or the money." Tears formed instantly, caught between awe and disbelief. "You rented out the entire opera house." Richard nodded. "You gave me 5 years of loyalty, kindness, love, even when I was nothing. This is 5 years of thank you." That night, she stood before the steps of the Metropolitan Opera House in a stunning crimson gown, not because it was expensive, but because it was hers, hand-sewn by a designer she met during her charity work. The theater lights glowed like 1,000 stars above, and the massive glass doors opened just for her. Inside, the grand chandelier glimmered above empty velvet seats. A full orchestra waited, silently tuning their instruments. At the front of the room sat a small envelope on her seat. Sophia picked it up. It wasn't from Richard. It was from Vivian. "Sophia, I can never truly express how ashamed I am of that night. Your husband didn't need to destroy my reputation. Your dignity had already exposed mine. You didn't scream. You didn't retaliate. And that, I've learned, is what true strength looks like. I'm learning. I hope it's not too late. With regret, Vivian Langston." Behind it was a second note, this one in simpler handwriting. "Sophia, that charity foundation you mentioned during the gala, I've donated $500,000 in your name. Not for forgiveness, just because it was the right thing to do. Elaine Preston." Sophia exhaled slowly. Her fingers gripped the notes as the lights dimmed, and the conductor raised his baton. The music began. The soprano's voice filled the hall like moonlight dancing across a quiet lake. Each note lifted Sophia higher, wrapping her heart in velvet. For 2 hours, the world faded away. She wasn't the woman from the headlines anymore. She was just a girl from a small town, lost in her favorite dream, finally come true. At the end of the performance, when the last note lingered like a soft kiss in the air, the orchestra fell still. She stood up, stunned and speechless. Richard walked toward her from the shadows. He had watched the entire thing from the wings. "Well?" he asked, offering his hand. She took it, and whispered, "It was perfect." As they walked out onto the grand plaza under the night sky, reporters waited behind the gates, but not for gossip this time. They didn't shout scandal. They clapped. "Mrs. Blake," one woman called, "do you have any advice for other women who feel overlooked?" Sophia paused. She thought for a long moment, then stepped forward. I don't have all the answers, she began softly. But I've learned this. People will try to define you by what you wear, what you have, and where you came from. Let them. You don't need to explain yourself. She looked at Richard, then back to the crowd. The right people will already know who you are. Click, 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 flash after flash. But she didn't shrink from it. She stood tall. Months later, Sophia's quiet world had grown. She never chased fame, but her story inspired others. She launched a new women's initiative, the Red Thread Foundation, supporting women from humble beginnings to rise in business, arts, and education. Vivian became a vocal donor. Elaine joined the advisory board. And many of the guests who had once laughed at her, they now attended her seminars, hoping to learn what they had never understood. Grace cannot be bought. Dignity cannot be faked. Strength isn't loud. It's steady. 1 year after the infamous gala, Sophia returned to the same ballroom, not for revenge, not for glory, but to host a charity gala for underprivileged girls with dreams bigger than the world would allow. As she stood by the floral archway greeting guests, a little girl approached her, tugging at her gown. "You're the lady in the red dress, right?" Sophia knelt down and smiled. "Yes, sweetheart." The girl nodded seriously. "My mom said you were brave. She said you didn't yell. You just stood like a queen." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She hugged the girl tight. "That's exactly right," she whispered. And that was Sophia's greatest triumph. Not that the world finally recognized her, but that she never needed it to begin with.